The reason I think a lot of us in the Conservative caucus got involved, whether that was the last election or the election, a couple elections before, is we want to see change in Canada.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everybody. This is a episode that we have been waiting to record for a long time. We are absolutely thrilled to have our own member of parliament, at least for the time being, until the election happens, which will be in a different riding. But we are so happy and thrilled to have our member of parliament from Flamborough-Glambricon, Dan Muys, the Shadow Assistant Minister of Transportation. Dan, thank you so much for coming on Northern Perspective.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Tanya. It's great to be here, especially in person in studio, and look forward to today's discussion.
Yeah, it's something that we've been wanting to share with our audience for a long time. We've gotten to know you over the last couple of years, and it's been an absolute privilege. For everybody that doesn't know, Dan is one of these MPs that just has so much integrity. He really cares about the community and is flabbergasted when he sees some of the things going on in the House of Commons with the Liberals. So, but before we get into that, Dan, how the heck did you decide to get into politics in the first place?
Well, thank you for your kind introduction. I've been involved as a volunteer in politics since I was about 13 years old. It was always an interest, and so I got involved by walking into my local campaign office back in the 1984 election and offering to help distribute literature and put up signs, and then had many different roles in the party. Worked as a summer student during university in Ottawa for a couple of cabinet ministers in the government of that day. And but then, politics was never really a full-time pursuit until the last election when I was elected. And then, of course, now it's a full-time job. So I've always been involved as a volunteer or a little bit of part-time on the side. But now it's full-time. And, I guess why? I mean, the reason I think a lot of us in the Conservative caucus got involved, whether that was the last election or the election, a couple elections before, is we want to see change in Canada. My omas and opas and my father, who was a toddler at that time, my mother, who was 5 years old, and her sisters, all came to Canada from the Netherlands after the Second World War. And at that time, after the devastation of the war, there wasn't much in the Netherlands. So they came to Canada and they sought a country of hope, opportunity, and freedom, and were able to work hard, save up, buy a home, start a family. In their case, they were contractors and had skilled trades, so they started a business, and that was needed in Canada at that time. And so, this dream of Canada was possible. And for my brothers and I, who grew up in a very middle-class upbringing, my mom was a nurse, my dad was a bricklayer. We didn't have everything we wanted. We grew up in Copetown, not far from here. We didn't have everything we wanted, but, in Canada, you could live a pretty good life, as a son of a bricklayer and a nurse. You couldn't do that anymore today after 9 years of Justin Trudeau. And that's really what's driving us. That's the mission that Pierre Poilievre has set out for us. We want to bring home Canada's promise, that promise that people from all over the world came here for. To succeed. And that middle class dream is really slipping away. So that's the passion that I see in my colleagues, that we see, of course, in our leader, Pierre Poilievre. I think Pierre says it well. Canada should be a place where anyone from anywhere can achieve anything. And Pierre himself, as the son of who was adopted by two school teachers, his wife Anna, who came as a refugee from Venezuela at 8 years old, and you came to Canada, and Canada made them a promise that if they worked hard, they could succeed, and they did. But they see now, and as they travel across the country, and I know I see this too as I talk to people across the Hamilton area and across Southern Ontario, and my Conservative MP colleagues see the same thing everywhere, every day in the communities, that people are so frustrated that you can't pursue that promise of Canada anymore after 9 years of Trudeau, because taxes are too high, because red tape is choking everything, business investment is down, the economy and jobs, inflation, all of these issues that are impacting the cost of living that, frankly, we took for granted 10 years ago.
One of the things that I hear often is that, we can't afford to have a child. And to me, that's just beyond tragic, because I think no joy until you have a child. And it's just people going, I can't afford a baby, like a baby's a luxury item. Like that to me is horrifying. What are the Conservatives going to do about the fact that Canadians are not able to afford children? Like that's huge.
Yeah, whether it's families making the decision that they want to only have one child, or can't afford to have another child, or even start a family, or the fact that permanent residents come here and decide to leave Canada and go back to their home country. That, Canada, again, people came to Canada for that hope, that opportunity, that freedom that they didn't enjoy in other countries, and they're leaving. So what is wrong with Canada that's happening? And cost of living, of course, is a big thing. And so we're going to axe the tax. That's pretty clear. But not just axing the carbon tax, which is driving up the cost of everything. Grocery inflation is 37% higher in Canada over the U.S., and you can track that very closely with the increases in the carbon tax. So we know it's having a direct impact. But also reducing income taxes. So we saw with the capital gains tax expansion that the Liberals put in, which is driving capital out of the country, and it's making it a disincentive for entrepreneurs, for small business, for professionals that we need. So we've proposed, or Pierre has proposed, a bring it home tax cut. So right away we're going to cut the taxes, but that's also part of stimulating the economy, so there's jobs and opportunities, so that we have all these resources and expertise in Canada that we need to unleash, and Pierre has talked a lot about that. For example, we have 18 LNG projects waiting for approval on the desk of the Prime Minister, and the Germans, the Japanese, the Poles, the Greeks, the other countries have said, we want your LNG. Well, that's billions of dollars in investment for our economy. We're here in Hamilton, steel town. I mean, there's a lot of steel that goes into LNG facilities, but it's not just that. There's mines, and there's critical minerals, there's rare earth minerals. We've got the second largest nuclear plant in the world at Bruce Power here, not far from here, and a whole nuclear supply chain around that. And we've got the expertise that we export to other countries, and a whole manufacturing and supply chain base in Southern Ontario around that. But also here we are in Canada, next to the world's largest consumer market, the world's largest economy. And we've got good people, we've got smart people. When a car is made in Windsor, it crosses the border 17 times. And so how do we harness all of the advantages, the great advantages that Canada has, to make sure people earn more powerful paychecks? So not only are you going to earn a larger and more powerful paycheck in a good job, but also reduce that cost of living, so that it's sort of two things. Because what we've seen over the last 10 years, or 9 years that the Liberals have been in, propped up by Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, is that the GDP per capita has been flat to declining. And in the US, it's gone up significantly. Incomes in Canada are declining. Every single solitary US state has a higher per capita income than Canada. And while incomes grew 19% since the pandemic in the US, they've fallen by 2.8% in Canada. And so incomes are going down, expenses are going up. Well, there's a huge gap. And so no wonder people are squeezed. And it's not just at the grocery store. When you renew your mortgage, everyone is seeing a big increase in payments because government overspending and money printing account for 2% of the increase in interest rate we've seen. The banks have all confirmed that. So again, getting our fiscal house in order is critical to reducing that cost of living. So if we can unleash that potential, all these advantages that Canada has that we were enjoying for generations until Trudeau came along. And there was the front page of the New York Times in 2014 that had Canada, the strongest, most prosperous middle class in the world, replacing the American dream. And at that time, under the previous Conservative government under Stephen Harper, we had 40-year low inflation. We had low interest rates. We didn't have any Canadian banks fail or Canadians home foreclosures the way there was in other parts of the world. We had a strong economy, and it was based on manufacturing, it was based on a resource sector, and we were prospering. So it wasn't this way before Trudeau. And I can assure you, under Pierre Poilievre, it isn't going to be this way after Trudeau. We have every advantage in the world, and we need to signal to the world that we're open for business and that taxes come down, and we're going to cut red tape with a chainsaw so that business invests in our economy and people can get those good jobs.
And you don't have to bribe businesses to invest in our economy.
Well, and that's the thing. We have the OECD, which is basically the 40 large industrial economies in the world, put out a report that Canada has the lowest business investment in our economy, private sector investment in our economy, of the entire industrialized world. Why is that? We've got everything the world wants. We've got all these advantages, but taxes are too high. Red tape is out of control. And so the private sector is not investing. And so we've seen job growth in the public sector, but decline in the private sector. Well, that's not sustainable in the long term, and that's not a recipe for a healthy, prosperous economy. And so, I'm not suggesting any of this is going to be easy. There's a big change to make, but unless we make this course correction, we're not going to go back to the Canada that my Omas and Opas came to, that people came, whether they came to Canada 5 years ago or 15 years ago or 50 years ago. This is the Canada they came to. We can't achieve that, and we can't harness the potential we have.
So in order for there to even be a Pierre Poilievre government, there needs to be an election. And as we all know, elections don't win themselves. And even though the Conservatives are doing well in the polls, as Pierre says, we haven't won any seats in the next election yet. So Canadians are always asking us, what can we do? How do I help? How do I get involved? To the average Canadian, what can they do to help a common sense Conservative government get elected?
That's a great question. 2025 is the year of change, and with that change comes hope. But it requires people to get involved. Politics is not a spectator sport. There's many ways that people get involved. That's what I did throughout my career in the private sector before I ran for elected office. Check out the Conservative Party website, conservative.ca, and you can go under team and you can get a link to every existing MP, or Google the name of the Conservative candidate in your riding, or Google the riding name with the word Conservative, and you'll find the landing page for that EDA. Contact those people. I mean, there's putting up signs. We're going to have a huge, I can tell you already from the doors we've knocked on, there's a huge demand for signs because people are ready for change. And so, that doesn't require a lot of heavy lifting with a hammer and maybe for the large signs, but the small signs people can put up, frankly, driving around in their car with so during the actual election, that's one thing people can do. Obviously, knocking on doors. We're already doing that. So all the candidates and all the current MPs are already knocking on doors to connect with constituents. And, we're driven by what we see Pierre Poilievre does. He's been out knocking on doors in target ridings across the country, and he's not going to stop, and we're not going to stop because, we need to get our message directly to people. So there's always candidates going out knocking on doors. If you're not into knocking on doors, there's phone calls to make. And if you're not into phone calls, there's at every campaign office, there's lots of different tasks to do. There's no shortage of things to do, and it's all campaigns are powered by volunteers. These are not paid operations like maybe they are in the United States and other places. But I was a volunteer for 40 some odd years in the party, and it's every campaign that's powered by volunteers. So jump in, contact the person. I mean, when I get a request from a potential new volunteer, I reach out, and sometimes we grab a coffee, we have a chat, find out what that person's interested in, and plug them into the organization. Most candidates and MPs now have a campaign manager, so you can sort of connect with those people and their campaign teams. But it's not a spectator sport. We can't expect change to happen on its own, and we know that. Look at the Liberals are going to throw everything at us. The NDP are going to throw everything at us. We're running ahead at the moment, but we can't take that for granted. We know and we've seen, and that's why we get out and talk to people one by one, door by door, street by street. That's how we're going to win ridings. And in order to form a strong majority government to make the change that needs to happen, we need to win some ridings that frankly we're going to win or lose by a few hundred votes. And so that effort is going to make all the difference in the world. And we know, particularly in the GTHA and in the suburban areas around the major cities in Canada, that sometimes those ridings sway by very slim margins, and a 1 or 2% shift in the polls can make all the difference. So when you've got the good ground game, that's going to make a difference. And we saw that with St. Paul's. I mean, I was in St. Paul's, and other people on our team were in St. Paul's, knocking on doors, and you saw that momentum. I vividly recall the Saturday before election day, which was by-election day, which was the Monday. Walking down the street, we were knocking on another round of knocking on doors, people that maybe weren't home the first time around, and wearing a Pierre Poilievre t-shirt, and cars were pulling over to the side of the street and saying, "Hey, we're with you," and that feeling of momentum. So you could sense, but there was a really strong ground game in St. Paul's, and we know that despite that long ballot, it was those advance polls that put us over the top. Well, that requires a lot of work. So even in terms of the actual election itself, it starts on day one with knocking on doors, but people can start voting right away. And so getting supporters, ballots in the box, getting those advance polls, working those advance polls, that can really make a difference in those close ridings, as it did in St. Paul's. But we saw the same in Oxford and in Durham and in other by-elections across the country. Of course, Cloverdale, Langley City last week, which was a great, huge margin, but they worked it. They didn't take anything for granted. Pierre Poilievre was the very first person from caucus out knocking on doors in St. Paul's. He was there a few times way back in the spring before the election was in sight, and so that's an inspiration for us to continue to work hard. And because when you're talking to someone at the door, you hear their real concerns. You hear from what people are actually dealing with, and when the polls are very clear, cost of living is an issue, it's because when you knock on doors and talk to people, that's what they're concerned about.
Yeah, you're not getting your information filtered through an echo chamber like you might online in
Correct.
a chat room or on social media. It's raw. You're face to face with these people, and that's what they're telling you.
Yeah.
Well, and there is some people that say, well, I haven't had anybody knock on my door. Well, that is just evidence that your EDA needs help. It needs help, volunteers. If the average member of parliament or candidate needs roughly 100 volunteers for an election, that's over 34,000 people that are needed across this country to help these candidates get elected. So just think about that for a second, everyone. 34,000 people. That's a lot of people. And
that's the size of a small town.
Right. Yeah. And some candidates don't have near the amount of volunteers that they need. And it doesn't matter if you know nothing about politics, if you know how to knock on a door, and if you know how to just talk to people, or if you know how to hammer in a sign, you have the skills that your EDA needs.
Yeah. There's usually in a typical riding about 200 polls. So on election day, we ideally we sent one person to each polling station to scrutineer the process for the count. And so
There's
you're
200.
right. So it's a small army that's working, and not just at an election day. We want to do the same thing for advanced polls. And so we always need people, and it doesn't matter if you've only got a couple hours. That's fine. A couple hours on election night to make some phone calls, or to be there for a count, or to, that critical last few hours after dinner when people it was the heaviest for voting. That's helpful. But then there's other people that come every day, and that's fine. And there's some people that start years in advance. There's every bit helps, and it all contributes to the change that needs to happen in 2025 and will happen in 2025.
Let's bring it home.
Let's bring it home.